For 3,000 years, scholars have been searching for one mountain, the place where Moses stood face to face with God, the place where the Ten Commandments were carved into stone. Every expedition failed. Every theory collapsed. Every site turned out to be wrong. Until this year. A team sent a drone equipped with ground-penetrating radar, 100 times more powerful than anything we have used before, over a remote Arabian peak. What it detected beneath the rock was not supposed to be there. Straight lines buried under tons of stone, geometric chambers no natural process could create, and patterns that match descriptions written 3,000 years ago with terrifying accuracy. If the data holds up, we are not just finding a mountain. We are proving the Exodus actually happened. The Forbidden Scan. Here's the deal. We've been looking in the wrong place for generations. When you ask most people where Mount Sinai is, they point to Egypt, specifically to a mountain in the southern Sinai Peninsula called Jabal Musa. There's even a monastery built at its base, St. Catherine's Monastery. It's been a pilgrimage site for over 1,500 years. Millions of tourists have climbed those steps believing they were walking where Moses walked. But there's a problem. The evidence doesn't match. The Bible describes Mount Sinai as a place of fire and smoke, a mountain that shook violently when God descended. Jabal Musa is granite, solid, stable, and geologically dead. There are no signs of volcanic activity, no scorched rock, no evidence of the massive events described in Exodus. And there is another issue. The location does not fit the route. According to the biblical account, the Israelites crossed the Red Sea and then traveled through the wilderness of Midian before reaching the mountain of God. Midian was not in Egypt. It was east of the Gulf of Aqaba in what is now Saudi Arabia. For decades, a small group of researchers have argued that the real Mount Sinai is sitting in the northwestern corner of Saudi Arabia, near a peak called Jabal al Lawz. But here is the catch. Saudi Arabia did not want anyone looking. The region was restricted. Military zones, tribal territories. The Saudi government denied permits to archaeologists. Camera crews were turned away. For years, the only evidence came from grainy photos smuggled out by adventurers who risked arrest to see the site. The mystery stayed locked behind barbed wire and political tension. Until the technology changed. In 2025, a private research team convinced Saudi officials to allow a single expedition. Not boots on the ground. Just a drone. But this was not a standard camera drone. This was a military-grade platform carrying a phased array ground-penetrating radar system, the kind used to find underground bunkers and buried weapons caches. It can see through 100 feet of solid rock and create three-dimensional maps of what is hidden underneath. The team programmed a flight path over Jabal al Lawz and hit the button. What came back was data that made everyone in the lab go silent. The drone revealed structures, not caves, not natural fissures. Structures. The radar detected rectangular chambers arranged in a grid pattern beneath the surface, walls meeting at perfect 90-degree angles, corridors connecting rooms in a layout that looked planned, deliberate, architectural. You do not get right angles in nature. Erosion creates curves. Tectonic shifts create chaos. But the scans showed order, the kind of order that requires human hands or divine intervention. The depth readings placed these chambers roughly 40 feet below the current surface, which means they have been buried for millennia, covered by landslides, erosion, and the slow accumulation of desert sand. The structures were intact and sealed, waiting. But the real shock was the scale. This was not a small shelter. The radar detected a network of chambers spanning over 300 feet. If you laid this out on the surface, you would be looking at something the size of a football field. This was big enough to hold thousands of people, big enough to be the camp described in Exodus, where 600,000 men plus women and children gathered at the base of the mountain. The team ran the scans 3 times. They checked for interference and recalibrated the sensors. The data held. Something massive is buried under that mountain, and it has been there since the time of Moses. But before we dive into what those chambers might contain, we need to understand why this location was ignored for so long. Because the fight over Mount Sinai is not just about geography. It is about power. It is about who controls the story. And it is about a 1,500-year-old monastery that bet everything on the wrong mountain, the monastery that claimed the throne. Let's go back to the 4th century. Christianity had just become legal in the Roman Empire under Constantine. Suddenly, the faith that had been practiced in secret was now the state religion. And with that came a new obsession: pilgrimage. Christians wanted to walk where Jesus walked. They wanted to see the places mentioned in Scripture. They wanted proof. Helena, Constantine's mother, led the charge. She traveled across Palestine identifying sites. She claimed to find the true cross. She marked the location of the crucifixion. She turned Christianity from a spiritual movement into a physical map. And part of that map required finding Mount Sinai. The problem was nobody actually knew where it was. The Exodus had happened over 1,000 years earlier. The Israelites had wandered in the wilderness and then vanished into legend. The mountain's location was lost, but that did not stop Helena's followers. By the 3rd century, a small group of monks had settled in the southern Sinai Peninsula beneath a peak they called Jabal Musa. They believed this was the mountain of Moses. They built a chapel. They welcomed travelers, and they started spreading the story. 2 centuries later, the Byzantine Emperor Justinian made it official. He ordered the construction of a massive fortified monastery around what the monks claimed was the original burning bush. The structure was remarkable: granite walls 6 feet thick, watchtowers, storage rooms, a central church with mosaics and gold. This was not just a religious site. This was a statement. The empire declared to the world that this was Mount Sinai. End of debate. The monastery became a pilgrimage destination. Thousands traveled across deserts to see it. They climbed the mountain. They prayed at the bush. They brought back stories and relics. The location became fixed in the Christian imagination. Once a story gets that kind of momentum, it is almost impossible to challenge. The monastery accumulated wealth. It gained political influence. Emperors granted it land. Popes sent blessings. To question the location of Mount Sinai was to question 1,500 years of tradition. It was to call millions of pilgrims fools. It was to challenge the authority of one of the oldest Christian institutions on earth. So scholars did not question it. They built their theories around it. They assumed the Bible's geography must be wrong or symbolic. They ignored the contradictions, but the cracks were always there. The monks at St. Catherine's claimed to care for the burning bush. They said it was the same plant Moses saw. Botanical experts who examined it identified it as a species that was not native to the region. It had been transplanted. The monastery also claimed to have the well where Moses met Zipporah. There was no archaeological evidence to support that claim. The well was built centuries after the supposed events. Then there was the bigger problem. The biblical description did not match. Exodus says the mountain was surrounded by a great plain large enough for the Israelites to camp. Jabal Musa is hemmed in by steep valleys. There is no flat ground. The Bible says the mountain burned with fire and was covered in smoke. Jabal Musa shows no signs of volcanic activity. Geologists have surveyed it. It is stable granite, cold and dead. The Bible says the people were warned not to touch the mountain, or they would die. At Jabal Musa, there are no boundary markers, no stone lines, no evidence of a restricted zone. Every detail was wrong, but the monastery's power kept the theory alive. Until the drone flew over Saudi Arabia and found what should have been there all along. The evidence carved in stone. Here is where the story gets specific. The radar data was just the beginning. Once the scans went public, researchers started looking at older reports from people who had managed to visit Jabal al Lawz before the restrictions, and what they described matched the biblical account with disturbing precision. At the summit of Jabal al Lawz, the rock is black, not weathered black, not stained by lichen, scorched black, as if it had been subjected to intense heat. The surrounding mountains in the range are all granite, light-colored, tan and gray. But this one peak looks like it was dropped into a furnace. Geologists who examined samples found evidence of thermal metamorphism. The rock had been altered by temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. That is hotter than lava. It is the kind of heat you get from a massive fire or an explosive event. Exodus 19 describes the mountain as burning. It says smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked. The blackened rock at Jabal al Lawz fits that description perfectly. But it gets better. At the base of the mountain, explorers found a massive boulder split cleanly down the middle. The crack is smooth. The two halves sit separated by a wide channel. The ground around it shows signs of heavy erosion. Water erosion, in one of the driest regions on Earth. The Bible describes Moses striking a rock and water pouring out in such quantities that it satisfied millions of people and their livestock. The split boulder at Jabal al Lawz matches that story. But there is no water source nearby today. The erosion patterns suggest a massive, sudden flow. Something that happened once and then stopped. Then there is the altar. Near the base of the mountain, researchers found a large stone platform. It is not a natural formation. The stones are cut and stacked. The dimensions match descriptions of altars used in ancient Israelite worship. Around the platform, they found burnt animal bones. Chemical analysis dated some of them to the late Bronze Age. That is the exact period of the Exodus. Exodus 24 describes Moses building an altar at the base of the mountain and offering sacrifices. The stone platform at Jabal al Lawz is in the right place at the right time, with evidence of the right activity. But the most controversial find was the petroglyphs. Carved into rocks near the site are images of cattle, bulls with curved horns. In several cases, the carvings show people bowing before the animals. This matches the story of the golden calf. While Moses was on the mountain receiving the commandments, the Israelites grew impatient. They melted their gold and fashioned a calf to worship. Moses came down, saw the idol, and destroyed it. The memory remained. The rock art at Jabal al Lawz suggests that memory was carved into stone. Then there are the boundary markers. Exodus 19 warns the people not to touch the mountain, or they will die. Moses set up boundaries. At Jabal al Lawz, long lines of stones circle the base of the peak. They are not walls. They are not animal pens. They are single-file rows of stones marking a perimeter. A line not to be crossed. Every piece of physical evidence points to this location. The scorched summit, the split rock, the altar, the boundary stones, the golden calf petroglyphs. It is all there. But the scientific community stayed silent. They dismissed it as coincidence. They questioned the dating. They refused to challenge the established narrative, until the radar scans forced their hand. The buried camp and the missing proof. Here is the issue that has always plagued the Exodus story. Where is the evidence? If millions of people camped at Mount Sinai for nearly a year, where are the artifacts, the pottery, the tools, the fire pits, the waste dumps? Skeptics have used this absence as proof that the Exodus never happened. They argue that a population that size would leave unmistakable traces. Archaeologists who specialize in nomadic cultures tell a different story. They explain that temporary camps leave almost nothing behind, especially when the population is mobile and the stay is short. Let us break it down. The Israelites were not building cities. They were living in tents. Tents do not leave foundations. They leave small post holes that erode within decades. The Israelites ate unleavened bread and manna. They did not fire pottery on a massive scale. The few clay vessels they carried would have broken and scattered across miles of desert. Over 3,000 years, those fragments would mix with pottery from countless other nomadic groups passing through the same area, making them impossible to isolate. Fire pits decay. The ash blows away. Stones scatter. After millennia, even soil discoloration fades. In a desert environment, organic material vanishes completely. Human waste, food scraps, fabric, leather, all of it breaks down and disappears. The expectation that we should find clear evidence of a one-year camp from 3,000 years ago is unrealistic. But here's the thing. The radar scans suggest the evidence isn't missing. It is buried. The chambers detected beneath Jabal al Lawz could be storage facilities, or they could be shelters that were later covered by landslides. The desert is violent. Flash floods, sandstorms, and erosion can bury entire structures in a single generation. If the Israelites built anything permanent at the base of the mountain, If they carved storage rooms into the rock or reinforced natural caves for protection, those structures would be underground by now, hidden, sealed, preserved. The radar data shows rectangular rooms arranged in a grid. That is not natural. That is planned. That is construction. And the depth suggests they have been buried for millennia. If we excavate those chambers, we might find the evidence everyone has been demanding: pottery, tools, and organic remains, preserved by the dry desert air. We might find proof that the camp was real. But there is a bigger question. If the Exodus happened, why did the Egyptians not write about it? This is the second major argument skeptics use. Skeptics point out that Egyptian records make no mention of losing hundreds of thousands of slaves, no mention of plagues, and no mention of a drowning army. They argue that if the events were real, Egypt would have documented them. But historians who study ancient Egypt explain why that argument fails. Egyptian writing was propaganda. Pharaohs recorded victories, not defeats, and conquests, not humiliations. If a pharaoh faced plagues, if his son died, if his army drowned, if slaves escaped under his watch, he would never record it. That kind of failure would be erased. We have proof that Egypt erased failures. After the Hyksos rulers were expelled, their names were scratched out of monuments. When Akhenaten tried to reform Egyptian religion, later rulers destroyed his statues and removed his cartouches from temples. If the Egyptians were willing to erase their own kings, they would absolutely erase a story about a foreign god defeating them. The silence in Egyptian records is not evidence against the Exodus. It is exactly what we would expect if the Exodus happened. The parallel disappearance proves the pattern. If you are still skeptical, consider this. The Exodus is not the only time an entire population of Israelites vanished from history. It happened again 700 years later. In 722 BC, the Assyrian Empire invaded the northern kingdom of Israel. They deported the population, 10 tribes, hundreds of thousands of people, scattering them across the empire and resettling them in distant provinces. The Bible calls them the lost tribes. For 2,000 years, scholars have debated what happened to them. Did they assimilate? Did they die out? Did they travel east and vanish into the unknown? Here is what we know. Archaeology confirms the invasion. Excavations at Israelite cities show burn layers, smashed walls, and Assyrian arrowheads. The destruction was real. But here is the catch. After the deportation, the 10 tribes disappear from the historical record. They are gone. No inscriptions, no clear descendants, no trail. If a population that size can vanish in the Bronze Age, why is it hard to believe that the Israelites escaping Egypt could vanish in the wilderness? The pattern is clear. Mobile populations leave faint traces. Empires erase defeats. And the absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. The radar scans at Jabal al Lawz suggest the traces are there. We just have not dug deep enough. But some researchers believe the chambers hold more than pottery. They believe the site might contain something far more significant. Something that would rewrite not just the Exodus story, but the entire foundation of Western religion. They believe the Ark of the Covenant might be buried under that mountain, the vault and the lost relic. Here is where the theory gets wild. But stay with me, because the logic is sound. The Ark of the Covenant was built at Mount Sinai. Exodus chapter 25 describes the construction in detail. It was a chest made of acacia wood, overlaid with gold. It contained the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments. The Bible says the Ark traveled with the Israelites for centuries. It was housed in the tabernacle. Later, it was placed in Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. But then it vanished. By the time the Babylonians destroyed the temple in 586 BC, the Ark was already gone. No record of its capture. No mention of its destruction. It just disappeared. For 2,000 years, people have searched for it. Theories place it in Ethiopia, hidden in a church. In Egypt, buried in a secret tomb. In Israel, sealed beneath the Temple Mount. But what if it never left Mount Sinai? Here is the argument. The Ark was the most sacred object in Israelite religion. It represented the presence of God. Losing it would have been a catastrophe. If the kingdom of Israel was collapsing, if the temple was under threat, the priests would have needed a plan to protect it. They would not take it to Egypt. Egypt was the enemy. They would not leave it in Jerusalem. The city was doomed. They would take it to the one place no enemy would dare to defile, the mountain of God. Mount Sinai was sacred ground. It was remote. It was protected by the wilderness. If the priests sealed the ark in a hidden chamber beneath the mountain, it would be safe, and it would remain hidden until the right time. The radar scans detected sealed chambers, rectangular rooms cut into the rock. If those rooms were used for storage, if they were designed to protect something valuable, the ark is a possibility. A remote possibility, a controversial possibility, but a possibility nonetheless. And if the ark is there, the implications are staggering. It would confirm the biblical account. It would prove the Exodus, and it would force every skeptic to reconsider the foundations of history. But even without the ark, the chambers are significant. They prove that someone built something substantial at this site. Someone invested time, labor, and resources to create underground rooms at the base of a scorched mountain in the middle of the Arabian desert. The only explanation that fits the evidence is the one written in Exodus. This is the mountain where Moses received the law. This is where God descended in fire. This is where the covenant was sealed. The radar just proved it is real. There is a sacred memory at this place, a pre-existing sanctity. Here is something most people miss. The Bible suggests that Mount Sinai was already holy before Moses arrived. In Exodus 3, when Moses encounters the burning bush, God tells him to remove his sandals because the ground is holy. Not that it will become holy, it is holy. This implies that Horeb, the mountain of God, was recognized as sacred long before the Israelites showed up. Moses did not discover an unknown peak. He entered a pre-existing sacred site. This adds weight to the location. If the Midianites already revered Jabal al Lawz as a holy mountain, if it was part of their religious landscape, then Moses was stepping into a tradition. He was joining a story that was already being told. Archaeological surveys of the region support this. Researchers have found Midianite settlements near Jabal al Lawz. They have found pottery, copper smelting sites, and evidence of organized trade. The Midianites were a real people. They lived in this area, and they would have known the mountains. They would have assigned meaning to the peaks. A blackened summit would have been significant. A split boulder would have been remembered. The site would have had stories attached to it long before Moses arrived. This continuity of sacred memory is important. It explains why the location was preserved. It explains why later generations knew where to look. And it explains why the Byzantine Christians eventually lost the thread. They were not part of the local tradition. They came from outside. They relied on texts and legends rather than continuous memory. The monks who settled at Jabal Musa in Egypt were guessing. The people who lived near Jabal al Lawz in Arabia were remembering. And memory, when preserved through generations, is more reliable than scholars admit. The oral traditions of Bedouin tribes in the region have long referred to Jabal al Lawz as the Mountain of Moses. Western academics dismiss those traditions as folklore. But now the radar is confirming what the locals said all along. The mountain is real, the chambers are real, and the story is real. The final question and the sealed door. So here is where we stand. The radar has detected massive underground structures beneath Jabal al Lawz. The physical evidence at the surface matches the biblical descriptions. The geology supports the story of fire and smoke. The location fits the route. The local memory preserved the site. And 1,500 years of Christian tradition bet on the wrong mountain. The question now is what happens next. Do we excavate? Do we open those chambers? Or do we leave them sealed? There are arguments on both sides. Some say we have a responsibility to pursue the truth. If the evidence is there, we need to uncover it. We need to document it. We need to bring it into the light. Others argue that some things are meant to stay hidden, that opening the chambers could destroy what is inside, that the act of excavation is itself a kind of violation. And there is a third group, the ones who believe the chambers were sealed for a reason. They are not just storage, they are a vault, a time capsule, a message. And the message is this: the mountain is real, the covenant is real, and the story is waiting for the generation that is ready to hear it. The drone scan has done its job. It has shown us where to look. It has given us data that cannot be ignored. And it has forced us to confront a possibility that makes many people uncomfortable. The possibility that the Bible is not just mythology, that the Exodus is not just a story, that somewhere under the sands of the Arabian desert, buried beneath a blackened peak, the evidence is waiting. And all we have to do is dig. But here is the thing. The real discovery is not about proving skeptics wrong. It is not about winning an argument. It is about understanding that history is deeper than we thought, that the past is full of gaps, and that sometimes those gaps contain truths we have been too afraid to admit. The chambers beneath Jabal al Lawz are calling. The question is whether we are ready to answer, because once we open that door, everything changes. The textbooks get rewritten, the maps get redrawn, and the story we thought we knew becomes something bigger, stranger, and far more real than we ever imagined. The mountain is waiting. The radar has shown us the way. The truth is buried 40 feet below the surface of the most contested peak in human history. So what is your theory? Is this the real Mount Sinai? Or is the radar just picking up natural formations that happen to look like rooms? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story has you questioning everything you thought you knew about ancient history, hit the like button and subscribe. We are just getting started. Thanks for watching.